And for more analysis on what this would mean for the aviation sector's growth and manpower prospects in the coming years, we're joined by Brendan Sobie, independent analyst and consultant at Sobie Aviation. Mr. Sobie, hello. Now, what growth areas do you envision Singapore tapping into to increase our competitive advantage in the sector?
Well, there's a lot of increasing demand in the aerospace sector coming out of the pandemic. There's going to be a lot of growth that's going to be focused on Asia, and Singapore is very well positioned to handle that growth from an aircraft maintenance and aerospace perspective, as well as from as a sustainable aviation fuel hub. There's a lot of potential to lead in the region. And at the moment, Singapore's already a major center for maintenance, and this area has really increased in the last couple of years because of massive demand for aircraft maintenance and overhaul. And Singapore is very well positioned as this continues.
Mr. Sobie, of course, going green, it's something that everyone, every country, every organization needs to be thinking about seriously. But there are always, and this is what tends to hold individuals and companies back, temporary short-term costs. Our higher ticket prices, could that put a dent in our air hub status? Or will going green in the longer term mean more profit to offset shorter-term loss?
Well, it really remains to be seen what kind of impact the levy that was announced today will have on travelers. My concern is that when you add this levy to the levy or facility charges that are already in place now and are increasing over the next couple of years here in Singapore to pay for Terminal 5, when you combine those two, it's a very significant amount, and that's added to the price of the ticket. So anytime you buy an air ticket, you have the base fare, but then you have all these taxes, and the taxes just keep on going up and up. And that makes it difficult for the airlines to stimulate demand because they have to have a sufficient airfare in order to cover their own costs before you even add all these costs, taxes, and levies. So there is a potential impact on demand, which could mean that there's less growth for Singapore Changi Airport in the future, which of course then opens up the question of, why all is this capacity being built if the demand is not sufficient to fill all the capacity. This is an unknown. There's no straight answer to this. It's going to be a long time before anybody really knows. But certainly, it's a question that should be asked, and it's something that is it something to look out for. How demand is impacted by all of these fees and taxes.
The Singapore aviation sector collectively is still optimistic. They say they want to hire 2,500 workers over the next few years. Where are these 2,500 talents, trained manpower going to come from? And do you think Singapore will be able to train them quickly enough?
Yeah, so I mean, most of these workers are for the sector supporting the overall region. So I mean, it's important to note that as the price of flying, particularly from Changi Airport, increases with all these levies, and even if the growth in Singapore Changi is not as high as the overall market or other parts of the region, which is very possible because you have growing middle classes, growing income levels, and a lot of other growth drivers that in the region overall that you don't necessarily have in Singapore, then that creates a lot of opportunity for the aviation sector regionally, and Singapore as a hub will service a lot of these aircraft, provide a lot of that support for the fleet, for the increasing fleet and increasing passenger traffic volumes that Singapore doesn't necessarily have to see, but can be seen in the region. And then that leads to the opportunities, but the only opportunities can only be realized successfully if you increase your manpower accordingly. And that's where a lot of the challenges are now. They have been already a couple of years, since the borders reopened and travel demand returned. There's been that gap from a manpower perspective, and it takes a long time to hire and a long time to train because a lot of these workers are quite specialized. But Singapore is well placed because the training facilities are in place, and there's increasing investment in training, as we've seen from recent announcements as well. And Singapore is an attractive place still to attract workers. Some of these workers will obviously have to come from overseas because the Singapore talent is very good, but there's just not enough of them to meet this demand. So I think Singapore can attract this talent from overseas and train this talent, but it takes time, and of course it takes a lot of investment. But I think a lot of that investment is already in place, so I don't see that necessarily as an issue. It's just and then hopefully, of course, the demand will be there, not necessarily in Singapore, but just regionally to support all these workers and generate all that work that is expected to flow through Singapore as the Asia regional industry, aviation industry, continues to grow or initially gets back on the growth trajectory after the pandemic and grows at a rapid pace over the long term.
And thanks for sharing your thoughts with us this evening, Brendan Sobie, independent analyst and consultant.